Hi, I'm Ben Cross.
And I'm Lauren Taylor.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're on a pretty specific mission today.
Yeah, we really are.
And that mission is basically to give you a total shortcut.
Yeah.
We want you to be incredibly well informed about one of the most musically complex, fiercely independent, and honestly just commercially massive bands of the 1990s.
Right.
We are unpacking the paradox that is Soundgarden.
And to put this whole comprehensive picture together for you today, we pulled from a towering stack of sources.
Huge stack.
Yeah, we're looking at deep music history archives. We've got extensive biographical profiles on the band and, the individual members.
We've got rock retrospectives in there, too.
Exactly, from ultimate classic rock, riffology, and yes, we even pulled this truly fascinating nugget of trivia from a deep-cut Reddit thread.
I honestly love when we find those hidden gems on Reddit because, well, here is the hook for today. This is the central mystery we really want to unravel for you.
It's a good one.
How does a band that intentionally tried to write undanceable music using bizarre time signatures and incredibly heavy, sludgy riffs, how do they accidentally sell 30 million records worldwide?
Right. How do they win Grammys and help define an entire cultural revolution by doing the exact opposite of what popular music dictates?
Exactly.
It's a phenomenal question. Soundgarden completely inverted the formula.
They really did.
They challenged the listener to rise to their level rather than, dumbing their art down to make it palatable for the radio.
Yeah.
So to really understand how they pulled off that magic trick, we have to look at the soil they grew from.
Okay, let's set that stage for everyone. Take us back to the early days, before the flannel shirts hit the high fashion runways.
Right.
And Seattle became the center of the musical universe. Where does all this start?
So we are in Seattle, Washington, and it's 1984.
Okay.
You have this burgeoning, murky, underground punk scene, and right in the middle of it, you have Chris Cornell.
Who, interestingly enough, was originally both the drummer and the lead vocalist.
Right. Which is wild. So he teams up with Kim Thale on guitar and Hiro Yamamoto on bass.
Yeah.
And their very first hurdle is simply figuring out what to call themselves.
I read about this in the notes, and it totally subverted my expectations.
Oh, I know.
Because when you hear the name Soundgarden and you listen to heavy metal or grunge, you just assume it's some dark, brooding, gothic reference.
Right, some bleak poetry or something.
Yeah. But it's actually tied to public infrastructure.
It is. According to that Reddit trivia we dug up, which, by the way, is fully corroborated by historical archives, they named the band after a public art installation in Seattle.
That's just so funny to me.
It's literally called a Soundgarden. It was built in the early 80s on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration property right next to Magnuson Park.
Can you paint a picture of this installation for us? Because it sounds kind of wild.
So imagine this series of massive steel wind-channeling pipe sculptures. They're essentially these giant weather vanes. And when the wind blows off the water of Lake Washington and moves through these hollow pipes, it creates these eerie, atmospheric, almost howling tones.
Wow.
Yeah, Kim Thale said the name perfectly suggested what they wanted to do musically, A plethora of cutting-edge rock that mixed the ethereal with the brutal.
Ethereal but brutal. That is such a vivid metaphor for their sound.
Right.
But playing that kind of complex music while simultaneously singing and drumming, that has to be nearly impossible for Chris Cornell.
It was completely restrictive. By 1985, Cornell realized that trying to deliver his incredibly demanding, soaring, multi-octave vocals while physically exhausting himself behind the drum kit, it just wasn't sustainable.
Right, you can't hit those high notes when you're out of breath from hitting a snare drum.
Exactly. They needed someone else to keep the beat. So they went through a brief lineup change, but the real alchemy, the moment Soundgarden truly became Soundgarden, happened in 1986.
Okay. This is when Matt Cameron enters the picture. The sources make a massive deal out of his arrival. What made him so different from the other drummers in that punk scene?
Well, you have to look at the broader picture of the Seattle underground at that time. Most punk drummers were playing with just sheer aggression.
Fast, hard, blunt force trauma.
Right. But Matt Cameron comes in, and his background is completely different. He actually grew up listening to jazz and progressive rock.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he was heavily influenced by drummers like Keith Moon of The Who. He brought a level of technical proficiency that was pretty much unheard of in sludgy punk rock.
And the archives specifically mention his use of open-handed drumming and ghost notes.
Yes, they do.
For those of us listening who aren't musicians, can you give us the sort of explain like I'm five breakdown of what that actually means and why it matters?
Absolutely. Okay, so think about a standard rock drummer. Usually they cross their right arm over their left to hit the hi-hat cymbal, while the left hand plays the snare drum.
Right, that classic crossed arm look.
Exactly. Open-handed drumming means you don't cross your arms. Your left hand plays the hi-hat and your right hand plays the snare.
Okay, so what does that actually do for the sound?
It totally opens up the drum kit. It allows the drummer to move more fluidly and hit other drums in complex patterns that would just be physically awkward otherwise.
So it's basically unlocking a new level of mobility on the instrument.
Precisely.
And what about the ghost notes?
A ghost note is a drum hit played very, very softly, usually on the snare drum, and it lingers in the spaces between the main loud accents.
Like a subtle echo.
Kind of. You barely hear it, but you really feel it. It creates this rolling, sophisticated, bouncing groove.
Okay, I think I can picture that.
You'd normally hear ghost notes in funk or jazz music. So to put that kind of elegant groove underneath a monstrous, distorted, heavy metal guitar riff, it was revolutionary.
It's that ethereal and brutal mix again.
Exactly. Cameron provided this incredibly complex yet rock-solid backbone that really gave the rest of the band permission to experiment.
And that level of musicianship clearly caught the attention of the industry. Because in 1988, they hit a major milestone that also caused a massive local earthquake in their scene.
Oh, definitely.
They released the album Liver Than Love, and they became the first grunge band to sign with a major label, A&M Records. Coming from a fiercely independent, anti-corporate punk scene,
Yeah.
how did their core fans react to that?
The backlash was severe.
I bet.
The Seattle punk ethos was all about rejecting corporate structures and mainstream validation. By signing a major label contract, a lot of their original fan base felt entirely alienated.
Did they think they were selling out?
Oh, they absolutely accused Soundgarden of selling out, of abandoning the tenets of their subculture just for a paycheck.
Wow. Did that criticism slow them down or change their trajectory at all?
Not at all. They were entirely focused on their own creative evolution. They just ignored the noise.
Good for them.
And that evolution required another personnel shift in 1990. Hiro Yamamoto left, and they brought in a new bassist, Ben Shepherd.
The band credits Shepherd with completely redefining their sound.
They do.
Kim Thale had this great quote in the sources where he said, Shepherd's writing contributions made their music faster and weirder.
I love that quote.
I love that description too. How did faster and weirder translate into their next project?
Well, it translated into their 1991 breakthrough album, Bad Motorfinger.
Oh, what a record.
Right. Kim Thale jokingly referred to it as the heavy metal white album.
That's a huge claim.
It was a massive leap forward in songwriting consistency. They were courting a mainstream metal audience, but they were doing it with this scientific, arty precision that nobody else really had.
I want to unpack just how innovative they were getting in the studio during this time because I was reading about the opening track of that album, Rusty Cage.
Oh, yeah.
The guitar riff on that song is legendary. It sounds almost metallic and unnatural. The notes say Thale used a wah pedal, but not the traditional way. How do they actually achieve that sound?
It's a brilliant piece of studio hacking. Normally, a guitarist rocks a wah pedal back and forth with their foot to get that classic funky wacka-wacka sound.
Right, like 70s funk.
Exactly. Thale didn't do that. He pushed the pedal down to a specific frequency and just left it parked there. He used it as a stationary audio filter.
So it's acting almost like an equalizer, choking out certain frequencies and boosting others.
Precisely. The result was this bizarre, compressed, ringing guitar tone. Thale himself said it almost sounds like the riff is being played backward.
It definitely has that tense, coiled spring energy to it.
And matched with that sonic experimentation was a really deep, often controversial lyrical focus from Chris Cornell.
Right, he was moving away from literal storytelling.
He was leaning heavily into ambiguity. Cornell wanted the lyrics to create colorful, evocative images that the listener could interpret for themselves.
Like the song Outshined.
Exactly. Cornell explained it was about the psychological whiplash of going from periods of extreme self-confidence to plummeting into severe depression.
That ambiguity, capturing a feeling rather than telling a specific story, that's a huge part of why it resonated so deeply with Generation X.
But not all of his lyrics were left purely up to the imagination. And that clarity actually got them into some serious trouble.
What happened with the song Jesus Christ Pose?
This is a classic example of art being wildly misunderstood by the general public.
Go.
The song was written as a harsh critique of famous public figures who exploit the symbol of Jesus' crucifixion. Essentially, Cornell was calling out celebrities who adopt a martyr complex to suggest they're being unfairly persecuted by the public or the media.
That feels like a pretty sophisticated societal critique.
Yeah.
How did the media react to it?
The nuance was completely lost. MTV looked at the title and the imagery and just outright banned the music video.
Oh.
And it went far beyond corporate censorship. When the band toured the United Kingdom in support of the album, they actually received credible death threats over that song from religious extremists who thought it was blasphemous.
That is intense. And their willingness to critique society extended into politics as well.
Yes, it did.
And just to be super clear for you listening right now, as we unpack the lyrics to this next track, New Damage, we are strictly looking at this through the lens of music history.
Absolutely.
We aren't taking any political stance or endorsing these viewpoints. We are just exploring Chris Cornell's creative mindset based purely on what the archival sources detail.
A very helpful distinction. So looking objectively at the archives, New Damage from Bad Motorfinger contains subtle, intentional lyrical critiques directed at the right-wing government of the United States at that time.
It's just another prime example of the band using their heavy, sludgy, massive platform to comment on broader societal and political structures, rather than just writing songs about partying or generic anger.
It really shows how much intellect was bubbling under the surface of these massive riffs.
And speaking of massive, during this era, they found themselves opening for Guns N' Roses on the legendary Use Your Illusion tour.
Oh, man!
That sounds like a dream scenario for a rising rock band. Was it?
You would think so, given how huge Guns N' Roses was. But Cornell's memory of it was actually pretty grim.
Really?
Yeah. He later talked about how soul-crushing it was to go out in front of 40,000 people for 35 minutes every single day. The vast majority of that stadium audience had never heard of Soundgarden, and they simply did not care.
Oh, that sounds awful.
He described it as a completely bizarre, isolating experience to play your heart out to a wall of indifference.
But that grinding perseverance eventually paid off. Bad Motorfinger was initially overshadowed by the explosion of Nirvana's Nevermind that same year, but it built a vital foundation for what was coming next.
Right.
So let's move forward to March 1994.
The release of Superunknown.
Yeah.
This was the mainstream explosion. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and went on to sell an astonishing 9 million copies.
It is widely considered an absolute masterpiece, but here's the part that really blows my mind. Well, when bands reach that level, the temptation is usually to polish their sound, make it more radio-friendly, maybe write a conventional pop ballad.
True.
Isn't making your music harder to listen to just commercial suicide? Because they didn't get poppier, they got weirder.
They vastly expanded their sonic palette, and they did it entirely on their own terms. Producer Michael Beinhorn gave the album this muscular, high-fidelity sheen, but underneath that polish, the band was incorporating Middle Eastern and Indian musical influences.
Wow.
They were utilizing incredibly unorthodox, almost dissonant guitar tunings, and lyrically, Chris Cornell was tackling deeply dark existential themes. He was actually heavily reading and inspired by the poet Sylvia Plath during the writing process.
You can really feel that psychological weight on the record. But somehow, it still produced some of the most iconic, inescapable singles of the decade. We have Spoon Man, which I understand was inspired by an actual person.
Yes, famously inspired by a real street performer in Seattle named Artist the Spoon Man, who actually plays spoons on the track.
Amazing. And of course, Black Hole Sun.
Black Hole Sun won a Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance. And if you grew up in that era, you absolutely remember the music video.
Oh, vivid memories of that video.
It was famously surreal, with these distorted, terrifyingly smiling suburbanites literally melting into the apocalypse.
It was everywhere.
It won an MTV Video Music Award and a Clio Award. It was a cultural phenomenon.
But underneath those massive MTV conquering hits was a musical complexity that completely defied all pop logic. We have to talk about the paradox of Soundgarden's time signatures.
We definitely do.
Most popular music, the stuff you hear on the radio or dance to at a club, is in 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
It's predictable. Your brain likes the symmetry. Your feet can easily tap to it. What was Soundgarden doing?
They intentionally avoided that traditional pop structure. The track Fell on Black Days is in 6/4 time.
Okay.
The song Limo Wreck is in 15/8.
15/8?
Yes. The Day I Tried to Live constantly alternates back and forth between 7/8 and 4/4.
Okay, we definitely need another explain like I'm 5 moment here.
Sure.
What does 15/8 time actually feel or sound like to a listener compared to standard 4/4 time?
Okay, imagine you're listening and you're just walking down a set of stairs.
All right.
In 4 time, every step is exactly the same height and depth. You don't even have to look down, you just find the rhythm and cruise.
Makes sense.
Now imagine 15/8 time. It's like walking down those same stairs, but every 4th step is suddenly half an inch shorter than the rest.
Oh, so your foot hits the ground a fraction of a second before your brain expects it to.
Exactly. It creates this lurching, disorienting, unbalanced feeling.
How on earth do you make a lurching, unbalanced feeling into a song that 9 million people want to listen to?
Well, Kim Thale had this brilliant quote about it. He said if they were actually trying to write hit singles, they would at least write songs in 4/4 so people could dance to them.
That's hilarious.
He claimed the odd meters were a total accident, just a result of the band jamming and writing what felt naturally heavy to them.
But how do they make it groove?
This is where we have to give immense credit to drummer Matt Cameron once again.
Ah, of course.
The sources explicitly note that the task of figuring out these bizarre mathematical time signatures usually fell to him.
That's a lot of pressure.
It was his job to take a riff that was in 15/8 time and somehow put a drum beat behind it so that it felt natural and fluid rather than jerky and academic. He made the weird feel completely accessible.
Incredible. So they hit the absolute peak of the mountain. They're one of the biggest bands in the world, defining an era.
Yeah.
But as we see so often in rock history, the view from the top can be dizzying and the descent can be incredibly rough.
Unfortunately true.
What happens when you reach the top?
Let's move into 1996 and 1997.
So following the massive, exhausting worldwide tour for Superunknown, the band decided to self-produce their next album, Down on the Upside, which came out in 1996.
Right.
But the recording sessions were heavily fraught with tension.
What was the core of the rift between the members? It primarily came down to creative direction. Chris Cornell wanted to experiment much more with acoustic instrumentation. He wanted to move away from the heavy, sludgy guitar riffs that were their absolute trademark.
And I'm guessing the rest of the band didn't love that.
Well, Kim Thale reportedly clashed with him heavily over this shift. He felt they were abandoning their identity, so the recording process became this long, grueling haul.
The album still had hits, though. Burden in My Hand, pretty news. But the internal strife was bleeding into their live shows, right?
It really was. They were physically and mentally exhausted. Cornell admitted that touring had become tedious and repetitious. They were just going through the motions.
And the pressure cooker finally exploded at a show in Honolulu, Hawaii in February 1997.
Yeah, the famous Hawaii show.
What actually happened there?
It was the very last stop of the tour. During the set, bassist Ben Shepherd suffered some equipment failure. And in a fit of sheer frustration that had likely been building for months, he violently threw his bass into the air and stormed off the stage.
Just left.
Just left. The rest of the band retreated shortly after, leaving Cornell to come back out alone and finish the show with a solo acoustic encore.
Man. And just 2 months later, in April 1997, they officially announced they were breaking up.
Matt Cameron summarized it bluntly years later. He basically said the band was simply, quote, eaten up by the business.
But the members didn't just fade away into obscurity. They scattered into various highly successful projects.
Right. Chris Cornell eventually formed the platinum-selling supergroup Audioslave with the instrumentalists from Rage Against the Machine.
But Matt Cameron's pivot is particularly incredible, and I think it highlights just how respected he is in the industry.
Oh, this is such a great story.
It's the summer of 1998. Barely a year after Soundgarden folded. What happens?
Pearl Jam's drummer at the time, Jack Irons, had to abruptly leave their tour due to health issues. So out of nowhere, Matt Cameron gets an ambush phone call from Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder and Stone Gossard. They ask what he's doing that summer and essentially beg him to fill in so they don't have to cancel the tour.
The mental bandwidth required for what he does next is staggering to me. Cameron accepts, and he has to learn over 80 Pearl Jam songs in 2 weeks.
It's unbelievable.
How do you even process that much musical information that quickly?
It really speaks to his jazz background and his rigorous discipline. He steps in for what is supposed to be a temporary high-stress touring gig, and he ends up staying.
Forever. basically.
Yeah, he became Pearl Jam's longest-serving drummer, officially remaining in the band all the way until 2025.
That's wild. Meanwhile, for over a decade, Soundgarden remained entirely dormant. Chris Cornell repeatedly shot down rumors of a reunion in interviews, saying they didn't want to tarnish the legacy.
Right.
But then we get to 2010, and how they got back together is hilarious.
It is the ultimate modern digital age mix-up. On January 1st, 2010, at the stroke of midnight, Chris Cornell posted a tweet.
Okay, what did it say?
It read, "The 12-year break is over and school is back in session. Sign up now, Knights of the Soundtable Ride. Again."
Naturally, the entire music world lost its collective mind.
Of course they did.
The media exploded with headlines. Soundgarden is back. But what was Cornell actually talking about?
He was literally just talking about updating their website and releasing some vintage merchandise.
That is so funny.
The band members had realized they didn't really have a centralized web presence or a Facebook page to protect their back catalog.
People completely read into it.
Totally. Kim Thale said his phone was suddenly ringing off the hook with promoters offering them millions for festival shows. His own mother called him, asking why he didn't tell her the band was back together.
So they basically got peer pressured by the internet into reuniting.
Pretty much. The hype was so massive, the reaction from the fans was so overwhelmingly positive that the band looked at each other and thought, well, maybe we should just jam and see what happens.
And that casual jam session led to actual gigs like headlining Lollapalooza in 2010, and eventually it led them back into the studio.
It did. In 2012, they released the sixth and what would be their final studio album, King Animal.
Did they still have that chemistry after so long apart?
They absolutely did. King Animal proved they still had that highly collaborative magic.
Do we have an example of that?
Yeah, a great example is the track by Crooked Steps. Matt Cameron brought the main riff, Ben Shepherd wrote the quick-ending bass part, Kim Thayil layered on the fluid middle section chords, and Chris Cornell arranged the vocals.
Wow, a true four-way split.
Exactly. They even had Dave Grohl direct a lighthearted music video for it where they rode around on Segways like a biker gang.
It was such a beautiful return to form, and I know they were planning to write and record even more.
Yes.
But as we know, that second chapter was tragically cut short.
It was. On May 18th, 2017, after performing a show in Detroit, Chris Cornell tragically passed away. It was a profound, devastating loss for the music world, and it meant that Soundgarden, in its original form, was over.
Following his passing, there were some unfortunate legal disputes between the surviving band members and Cornell's widow, Vicky, primarily regarding the ownership and release of 7 unreleased vocal tracks Chris had recorded before his death.
But the sources confirm that in April 2023, those legal battles were finally resolved amicably out of court.
That's good to hear.
It really is. It cleared the way for those final recordings to eventually be completed and released by the surviving members, honoring his final work.
And their legacy was permanently cemented shortly after that. In November 2025, Soundgarden was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
A well-deserved honor.
They were inducted by Jim Carrey, no less. And during the ceremony, Chris Cornell's daughter, Toni, sang Fell on Black Days in tribute to her father. It was a powerful, emotional capstone to an incredible, turbulent journey.
It really was. So as we pull back and look at this massive stack of research, what is the ultimate, high-level insight here? Why does Soundgarden's story matter so deeply to you, the listener?
I think it matters because they are the ultimate proof that you do not have to compromise your weirdness or your artistic integrity to be successful.
Exactly.
Soundgarden succeeded not by reflecting the mainstream culture, but by forcing the mainstream culture to adapt to the weirdness of the Seattle underground.
They completely refused to dumb their music down.
They played in 15/8 time, they used bizarre guitar tunings, they wrote ambiguous poetic lyrics, and they demanded that the listener step up and meet them where they were.
And 30 million people stepped up.
They really did.
They deeply trusted the intelligence of their audience. And before we go today, we want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. Something we found deep in the archives but haven't touched on yet today.
Right. Remember how we talked about them returning in 2012 with new music? Well, the very first new song they released upon reuniting was a track called Live to Rise. And it wasn't on an indie label, and it wasn't a secret underground release.
Not at all.
It was written specifically for the soundtrack of the blockbuster Marvel movie, The Avengers.
Right. So we ask you to ponder this. How does a band that started in the murky, anti-establishment punk metal underground of 1980s Seattle A band that actively alienated early fans for being sellouts eventually become the literal musical backdrop for the world's biggest, most commercial superhero franchise.
Is it the ultimate irony? Or is it simply proof that if counterculture art is just too good, too powerful, and too undeniable to be ignored, it inevitably becomes the mainstream?
It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear that weird, backward-sounding guitar riff on the radio.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We highly encourage you to go put on some headphones, close your eyes, and explore Soundgarden's music for yourself. Until next time.